Let's get some perspective on the ongoings at the SABC. Govin Reddy is a former deputy CEO at the public broadcaster and one of the co-authors of this joint letter that's written by former executives. It's great to have you. Thanks for being with us. You label in this letter developments at the SABC as a series of betrayals. Why?
Well, Iman, you know, the signatories of that letter played a pivotal role in transforming the SABC from what was then a propaganda tool of the National Party, and essentially a state broadcaster, into a respected public broadcaster. And I happened then to have served both on the Commonwealth Broadcasting Association and the Southern African Broadcasters Association. We were internationally recognized as one of the leading public broadcasters in the world. In the old days, it was the Australians and the Canadians and the British who held that banner. But the Africans recognized us, that this is a public broadcaster that's worth its salt. And we worked very hard to do that. And then, how many years later, the wheels have turned completely and we're back to status quo.
Well, when did things start to go wrong? Is it just under Mr. Motsoeneng's stewardship?
I think there has been a gradual decline over the years, but under Mr. Motsoeneng's leadership, it has plummeted. It has really gone to the depths.
Because I think people would make the comparison under when Snooky Zikalala's was there under his tenure, there were a series of unfortunate events, so to speak, to the point where even a High Court judge found that he, had been guilty of certain infractions in the organization. We saw internal battles between himself and Dali Mpofu, to the point where Dali Mpofu himself was suspended. And the same judge called the SABC board out then for what it labelled a dereliction of duty. So why speak out now, some would ask?
No, you're quite right. You're very right to say that those were the dark days, Iman, under Snooky. But at least Snooky was pushed out. He had to go. But here we have the public protector saying this man is not fit to hold office. We have the court saying he's not fit to hold this office. And yet he's still there. That is the amazing thing.
So how's he been allowed? Because some would say, Mr. Reddy, that he's been enabled to become the person that he is now, enabled to wield the power that he does at the SABC. Who, in your view, has allowed Mr. Motsoeneng to become what he is today?
Well, I must speak very candidly here. Firstly, it's the board, because the board appears to endorse what he's doing. Secondly, it is the Minister of Communications who has usurped many of the functions of the board, and she has publicly gone on record endorsing him. And thirdly, the president, who has remained silent. So when you have those three tiers, which are supposed to control, not necessarily control, but have authority of the CEO, either supporting him or remaining silent, you give him the leeway to do what he does. And he's doing it. And
these are the three individuals that you direct this letter to. You begin by saying, Dear President Zuma, Minister Mutambi, and Professor Magube, who of course has just been appointed CEO. If, as you say, he's been allowed, the phenomenon of Mr. Motsoeneng has been allowed to be created, what's it going to take then to dismantle that?
It will require an enormous public pressure. And I think there is a convergence of public pressure that's taking place. A whole number of NGOs and civil rights organizations, including trade unions, are taking a stand against this. They've had demonstrations against the SABC. They picketed against the SABC. They wanted to see Hlaudi Motsoeneng, and he reneged on them this morning. And he locked the gates. He wouldn't even allow them to go in. And it was a delegation led by Zwelinzima Vavi, a powerful delegation. He said he will relook at the disciplinary hearings. He promised that to Mr. Vavi, and today he backtracked. So he feels he can do what he wants to and get away with it. But to answer your question, it has to be unrelenting, concerted pressure coming from all sides.
You know, people will look back at the developments over the last week or so and cite things like the former acting CEO, Mr. Jimmy Matthews' affidavit to the SCA, which on the one hand endorsed the progress in the SABC under Mr. Hlaudi Motsoeneng. Days later, proffering his resignation, and then just at the weekend making these stunning confessions about how editorial policy, with his complicity, with his acquiescence, had compromised coverage, for example, of parties like the EFF, where you see this targeted campaign of editorial decisions intended to block out certain voices in South African society. If this is happening with the complicity and at one point the blessing of key members, people who could have moved the organization in a different direction, what hope is there now if even those, now that they've sort of turned around, are not there? Who's left to pick up the mantle?
You see, Iman, there can never be a point of no return. Something has to give, because what is happening at the SABC now is untenable and it is unacceptable. It is destroying, it is badly affecting our democracy, and it's turning the clock backwards. And we don't want to have one of the best constitutions in the world and a state broadcaster next to it. We have a great constitution and we want a public broadcaster which matches it. Right now we have a state broadcaster which has virtually become a propaganda tool of the ruling party, because the man in charge is blacking out news, he is punishing journalists who speak out, and is curbing the fundamentals of freedom of expression. It is an untenable situation, and it cannot be allowed to continue. And now we're coming up to the elections, which is a very crucial time. And this is when the ANC has to act, to say, the first elections which were held in 1994, the ANC was party to it, to say this must be absolutely free and fair. And I was there at the SABC at that time as part of the executive, and we conducted an election which was absolutely free and fair. No, we didn't conduct it, but the SABC broadcast, in terms of the codes of conduct set by the IEC. But here we go into an election process with one man who's bulldozing everything, and we're terrified what he's going to do come August 3rd.
We'll leave it there. Govin Reddy, thank you very much for talking to us. We appreciate your time. He's a former executive at the SABC.